Let us take a moment to consider a piece of poetry. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. So says poet John Donne. And let's think about that for a moment. No man is an island. But do you know what is an island? Australia. Australia is a geographically isolated country. We are very far away from stuff. Despite this, Australia relies on trade. Consider this. Australia exports 20% of everything it makes, and our imports are valued at 20% of Australia's GDP. And when it comes to trade, there are two concepts we look at in particular. There is the direction of trade and the composition of trade. The direction of trade is about who Australia trades with. In the 1950s, Australia mainly traded with the United Kingdom and other European countries. This was because Australia was settled by the UK and had strong links to Europe. In the decades after the 1950s, Australia's trade patterns shifted to Japan, and then to China, South Korea, and other Asian nations. A reason why this shift occurs is because the UK decides to join the EU. As a result, bang, it's less attractive for Australia to trade with the UK. This is because the EU gives preferential trade deals to its members and penalises non-members. As a result, Australia's trade shifts from Europe to Asia. Just look at the numbers. In the 1960s, 8% of Australia's exports went to China. Today, around 40% of Australia's exports go to China. In the 1960s, 35% of Australia's exports went to the EU. Now, only 4% goes to the EU. To talk about the composition of trade, we'll use the example of this salad. This delicious salad is composed of lettuce, tomato, carrot, tuna and cheese, and walnuts for some reason. Composition simply equals the components of a salad, or in our case, of trade. With trade, we talk about the composition of Australia's exports and imports. Australia's exports are typically composed of agricultural products such as wheat, wool and beef, as well as minerals, natural resources such as coal, gold and iron ore. The composition of Australia's exports have changed significantly in recent years. Australia's manufacturing and agricultural exports have declined in importance. Australia's mineral and commodity exports have increased in importance, particularly due to the mining boom. The composition of Australia's imports has remained relatively consistent. We tend to import things like manufactured goods and consumer goods. This car, an iPhone, things that we want but don't make ourselves. One thing to note, economists have different views about Australia's reliance on commodity exports. On the one hand, commodity export prices are likely to continue to rise, fueled by demand in places such as China and India. On the other hand, by relying on commodity exports, we are vulnerable to changes in economic conditions in those nations. So if China slows down, they'll demand less of our commodity exports and the prices will fall. So in order to address this situation, Australia is trying to increase its service exports. Now these are in demand worldwide, can command a relatively high price on world markets, and are much less vulnerable to changes in economic conditions. Okay, what should you take from this video? First, when it comes to the direction of trade, think about the shift from the UK and Europe to Asia. Second, when it comes to the composition of trade, think about the shift away from manufacturing and towards commodities such as iron ore. Third, Australia's reliance on commodity exports creates problems. It means that we are vulnerable to fluctuations in economic growth, particularly among our major trading partners. And remember, while no man is an island, Australia is an island, and one that relies heavily on trade.
It's only like 4 lines. You probably should be able to memorize it.